The snow fell silently outside the cracked window of the studio apartment in South Bronx. But inside, chaos erupted, 4:30 in the morning on a Thursday in December, and Elena Rodriguez was already fighting for her son's life. "Lucas, baby, breathe with me," she whispered desperately, holding her 5-year-old son against her chest as he wheezed and gasped for air. The asthma inhaler was empty. She had checked it 3 times. In her wallet, $3.75. The medicine cost $120. "Mama, is Lucas going to die?" 5-year-old Mia stood in the doorway, her gray eyes wide with terror. "No, baby, no," Elena said, but her voice cracked. She was 27 years old. With dark brown hair she never had time to brush anymore, hollow cheeks from skipping meals so her children could eat, and shadows under her green eyes so deep they looked like bruises. A faded scar on her left wrist marked where her uncle had pushed her down the stairs at 14, right after her parents died in the fire. She had survived that, survived the streets, survived giving birth alone, but watching her son struggle to breathe, something inside her began to crack. The apartment was freezing. The heating had not worked in 3 weeks. Elena could see her breath forming clouds in the air. The eviction notice sat on the kitchen counter, 7 days before they would be homeless again. She thought about her 3 jobs, 19 hours of work daily for barely enough to survive, and still, it was never enough. Lucas's breathing finally steadied, the attack passing on its own. Elena held both children close and let herself feel the weight of everything. The exhaustion, the hunger she hid from her babies, the fear that lived in her chest like a second heart. She thought about him, the man from 6 years ago. Christmas Eve at the Plaza Hotel. She had been 21, invisible in her cheap uniform among diamonds and champagne. He had been standing alone on the balcony in the snow, beautiful and broken. Vincent. She never learned his last name. He had made her feel like more than a ghost for one perfect night. Then he vanished, left her with 2 children, and gray eyes that still haunted her dreams. What Elena did not know was that 3 blocks away, a black SUV sat idling in the darkness. Inside, a man spoke quietly into his phone. "Target confirmed. It is her. And sir, there is something else. She has children, twins." The boy has gray eyes. A long pause, then a voice, deep and controlled, with something raw underneath. "I am on my way." The snow continued to fall, covering the broken streets in white, hiding the poverty beneath something that almost looked like peace. But peace was a lie, and for Elena Rodriguez, the past she thought she had escaped was about to crash back into her life. Like, share, and subscribe if you want to know what happens when Vincent Callahan discovers he is a father. Hit that notification bell so you will be the first to know. Because in a world where Elena had stopped believing in miracles, one was about to find her whether she was ready or not. The asthma attack had passed, but the fear had not. Elena sat on the icy floor, her back pressed against the peeling wall, her 2 children curled up in her arms like kittens seeking warmth. She did not dare move, did not dare breathe too deeply, afraid that even the slightest motion might wake the nightmare that had only just fallen asleep. The clock on the wall read 5:15 in the morning. 45 minutes remained before she had to be at the diner. Elena gently laid Lucas down on the thin mattress on the floor, the boy still breathing steadily, though the wheezing sound was one she knew all too well. Without medicine, the next attack could come at any moment. She opened the refrigerator. Inside there was only half a carton of milk nearing expiration, 2 slices of stale bread, and a small jar of peanut butter. Elena spread the peanut butter onto the bread, cut it into small pieces, and poured the milk into 2 yellowed plastic cups, her children's breakfast. She ate nothing. She had not eaten since yesterday at noon. Her last meal, a half sandwich a customer had left behind, which she had quietly slipped into her pocket while clearing the table. At 5:45, Elena woke the children. Lucas opened his eyes first, gray eyes heavy with exhaustion, but he did not cry, did not complain. Her son never cried, not even when he was in pain, and that hurt Elena's heart more than any tears ever could. Mia woke next, rubbing her eyes and yawning, then saw her brother and immediately crawled over to hug him. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I am fine," Lucas answered, his voice still hoarse. Elena dressed the children in clothes that were too small and too thin, wrapped scarves around their necks, pulled knit hats over their heads, and slid torn gloves onto their hands. Outside it was still dark, and the snow was still falling. Mrs. Chen's apartment was at the end of the 3rd-floor hallway, 6 doors down from Elena's. Elena knocked softly. the sound echoing through the silent corridor like a drum in a church. Mrs. Chen opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting. She was a 70-year-old Chinese woman with silver hair twisted into a bun and eyes clouded by cataracts but still warm. "You are leaving early again, child?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, I have the morning shift," Elena replied, trying to hide the exhaustion in her voice. "Lucas had an asthma attack last night. I know you are busy, but please." Mrs. Chen waved her hand and pulled the children inside. "Say no more, come in, children, I have hot porridge." Elena started to speak about babysitting money, about how she would pay her in full this weekend, but Mrs. Chen had already closed the door with a gentle smile. Elena knew she would not take the money. Mrs. Chen was as poor as she was, perhaps poorer, yet she never asked for anything, and that was what made Elena feel both deeply grateful and ashamed to the bone. Outside, the South Bronx at 6 a.m. looked like a ghost city. Snow covered the cracked sidewalks, the rusted cars, the overflowing trash bins. Street lights flickered weakly, their pale yellow glow unable to chase away the darkness pooled in the alleys. Elena walked through the snow in sneakers with holes in the soles, melted snow soaking into her socks. 20 minutes on foot to the diner because she did not have $2.75 for the subway fare. The wind cut across her face like a knife, but Elena felt nothing. She was too used to the cold, too used to feeling nothing at all. She kept walking, one foot in front of the other, like a machine programmed to move. Lucia's diner appeared through the snowfall like an island of light. The small diner sat on the corner, its red neon sign flickering, its windows fogged with steam. Elena pushed the door open, warmth rushing over her face like a gentle slap. The smell of coffee, of frying bacon, of toasted bread, the smells of survival. Lucia stood behind the counter, a 62-year-old Cuban woman with a round figure, black hair streaked with gray, and brown eyes glowing like embers. "Madre de Dios, you look like a corpse," she said. Elena tried to smile. "Thank you, I love you too." Lucia shook her head, poured a cup of hot coffee, and slid it toward her. "Drink then, go change, the customers will be here soon." Elena wrapped both hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her numb fingers. A new day had begun. 19 hours of work waited ahead of her, and she would survive it, as she had survived everything else, because that was the only thing she knew how to do. The diner began to fill up around 6:30 in the morning, workers stopping in for breakfast before their shifts, taxi drivers, construction workers, nurses, just coming off the night shift. Elena moved between the tables like a ghost, arms balancing plates of food, lips curved into a practiced smile, while her mind was somewhere else entirely. She thought about Lucas, about the wheezing sound of her son's breathing, about the empty asthma inhaler in the drawer at home. $120. To someone else, it might have been the cost of a nice dinner, but to Elena, it was a fortune she could not reach. She had just set down a plate of eggs and sausage at table 7 when she felt a hand slide onto her waist. The hand was hot and damp, even through the thin fabric of her uniform. Elena froze but did not turn around. She knew exactly who it was. Tony Marsh, the morning shift manager, 35 years old, with thinning hair plastered to his scalp with sweat and eyes that always looked at her in a way that made her feel sick. "You look real good this morning, Elena," he whispered near her ear, his breath heavy with coffee and cigarettes. "When are you finally going to have a drink with me?" Elena stepped sideways, slipping out of his grasp. "I am busy, Tony. There are customers waiting." She kept her voice calm, but inside she was shaking, not with fear but with anger, the kind of anger she swallowed every day, every hour, every minute when he touched her, when he said filthy things, when he looked at her like something he could buy. Tony followed her toward the counter. "Busy with what? You work like a dog and you are still dirt poor. Let me take care of you, Elena. I can give you what you need." He grinned, a grin that made Elena think of the rats in the walls of her apartment. "I heard you are about to get kicked out of your place. Pretty sad, huh? Where are those 2 cute little kids of yours going to sleep?" Elena stopped and spun around to face him. "What do you know about my children?" Tony laughed even louder. "I know a lot of things, sweetheart. This is my neighborhood. Nothing happens here without me knowing." Elena was about to say something, about to scream in his face, about to do something she knew would cost her her job, when a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Tony Marsh, what the hell are you doing out here instead of checking the kitchen?" Lucia stood behind the register, brown eyes blazing, hands planted on her hips. The owner looked like a mother hen defending her chicks, small but fierce enough to make even Tony step back. "I was just talking to an employee." "Lucia." "Talking." Lucia stepped closer, her voice dropping low and dangerous. "I saw how you were talking. The next time I see you put your hands on that girl, I will call your uncle and tell him exactly what his precious nephew is doing to my staff. Do you understand me?" Tony went pale. "Lucia, I did not." "Get out!" Lucia roared. Tony disappeared into the kitchen like a dog with its tail between its legs. Elena stood there, her hands still trembling. Lucia came up beside her, her voice softening. "Are you all right?" Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Lucia sighed. "I know you need this job. I know you cannot afford to stop working. But if that man touches you again, you tell me immediately. I will figure something out. Do you understand?" Elena looked at the older woman, the one who had given her a job when no one else would, who had pretended not to see when she slipped leftover food into her pocket, who had paid her early more times than she could count. "Yes, I understand. Thank you." Elena's phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, looked at the screen, and her heart dropped into her stomach. A message from the landlord. The 7 days were up. If she did not pay the 3 months of back rent by this Friday, eviction proceedings would begin. She had exactly 2 days. 2 days to find $2,400. Elena stared at the number, feeling as if someone had just punched her in the chest. $2,400. She worked 19 hours a day and made about $90 if she was lucky with tips. She would need 27 days to earn that amount. And that was only if she did not eat, did not buy Lucas his medicine, did not pay a single other bill. "Are you okay?" Lucia asked, when she saw Elena's face go pale. Elena shoved the phone back into her pocket and swallowed hard. "Yes, I am fine. It is nothing." But Lucia had seen it. She pulled Elena into the corner behind the counter, away from customers and other staff. "Tell me." Elena wanted to lie, wanted to say everything was fine the way she always did, but there was something in Lucia's eyes that stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was desperation. "The landlord is threatening to evict us. I owe 3 months of rent. Lucas needs asthma medicine and I cannot afford it. I do not know what to do anymore." Her voice broke on the last sentence, and Elena hated herself for it. Lucia was silent for a long moment. Then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a wad of crumpled bills. "This is my tips for the week. $80. It is not much, but it is enough to buy Lucas his medicine." Elena shook her head. "No, I cannot take it. You need it too." Lucia pressed the money into her hand, her voice firm. "I am old. I do not need much. You have 2 kids. Take it and do not be stupid enough to refuse." Elena looked down at the money in her hand, the wrinkled $1, $5, and $10 bills smelling of frying grease. She did not cry. She had forgotten how to cry a long time ago. But she lowered her head so Lucia would not see the shine in her eyes. "Thank you." Lucia patted her shoulder. "Do not thank me. Survive. And one day, when you can, you help someone else. That is how we survive in a place like this." The shift dragged on as if it would never end. Elena carrying plates, refilling coffee, clearing tables, smiling at customers while inside she was breaking apart piece by piece. The $80 from Lucia sat in her pocket like a glowing ember, warm yet burning her conscience at the same time. She would buy Lucas his medicine as soon as her shift ended. But what about the rent? What about the $2,400 hanging over her like a sentence, the numbers spinning in her head like a nightmare with no escape? By 11 in the morning, the diner began to thin out, and Elena took the chance to wipe down the empty tables near the window, a rag in her hand, while her eyes drifted outside without her meaning them to. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky remained heavy and gray, like an old worn blanket pressing down on the city. And then she saw it. The black SUV parked across the street beneath a bare maple tree, its windows dark as ink, impossible to see through. Elena froze, her heart beating faster. She had seen that same vehicle earlier that morning while walking to work, parked on the corner 3 blocks from her apartment, and now it was here. She told herself she was imagining things. New York was full of cars, thousands of black SUVs. It had to be a coincidence, but there was something about the way the vehicle sat there unmoving, no one getting in or out, the engine still running, breathing white smoke into the cold air, that made her unable to look away. She remembered the years she had spent on the streets, when she had learned to trust her instincts that had saved her from predators in the dark, from men who approached with gentle smiles and cruel intentions, and those instincts were screaming inside her now. "Elena, what are you staring at out there?" Lucia's voice startled her and she turned back, forcing herself to look normal. Nothing, ma'am. I am just thinking too much. Lucia studied her, then glanced toward the window where the black SUV still waited. Is someone bothering you? No, Elena answered quickly. Maybe too quickly. I am just tired. Lucia did not press further, but worry filled her eyes. Go home early today. It is slow. Maria and I can handle it, but I still have my shift. Elena began to protest, only for Lucia to wave her off. Go. Rest. You still have another job later. Elena changed in the tiny staff room, her hands shaking as she untied her apron. She took out the $80 Lucia had given her, counted it once more, then tucked it deep into the inside pocket of her coat. Lucas's asthma medicine. She had to stop at the pharmacy before picking up the children. When she stepped outside, the cold wind slapped her face. She lowered her head, pulled up her hood, and started walking. She did not look toward the black SUV. She did not dare. The pharmacy was 4 blocks away, and Elena walked fast. Her steps hurried over the snow-covered sidewalk. She felt something behind her, a presence, a gaze, yet every time she turned around there were only ordinary passers-by, tired and indifferent New York faces, no black SUV in sight, and she told herself she had imagined it all. Inside the pharmacy, she bought an albuterol inhaler for Lucas, $118, nearly all the money Lucia had given her, leaving her with $2 to last until payday. It was fine. She had survived on less before. She could skip meals. She was used to that. Leaving the pharmacy, Elena turned onto a side route toward the South Bronx, longer but quieter, avoiding crowded areas she disliked. Crowds made her feel suffocated, trapped, and halfway down the street she heard the sound of a car engine, slow and steady, as if someone were matching her walking pace. Elena did not turn around. She quickened her steps, her heart pounding like a war drum. The engine stayed behind her. She turned into a narrow alley, a shortcut she had known since her days on the street, too tight for a car to follow, and she stopped in the middle of it, her back against the cold brick wall, forcing her breathing to slow. 1 minute passed, then another. Silence. No engine, no footsteps, and she let out a breath, scolding herself for her paranoia. But when she stepped out of the alley, the black SUV was parked right at the end of the street, motionless like a hunting animal waiting for the right moment. Elena stood frozen, blood rushing to her head, and for several endless seconds, she and the vehicle faced one another. Then the SUV slowly rolled forward, turned, and disappeared into the flow of traffic on the main road. Inside the vehicle, Marcus lifted his phone, his voice calm and professional. She has noticed us. She is alert. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the voice replied, cold and decisive, continue the surveillance. Do not lose her, but do not approach. Not yet. Elena picked up the children from Mrs. Chen's apartment, her arms clutching the asthma medication, as if it were a treasure. And when Lucas saw the new inhaler, his gray eyes lit up not with joy but with relief, a relief no 5-year-old child should ever have to feel just to be able to breathe. And that realization tore Elena's heart apart. On the way back to the apartment, Mia held her hand, the little hand cold inside torn gloves, and asked softly why she looked sad. And Elena looked down at her daughter and forced a smile, saying she was not sad, only tired. But Mia was not fooled. Those gray eyes identical to her father's studied her as if they could read every thought. And then came the question that nearly made Elena stumble, asking if she was thinking about their father. The children rarely asked about him, and Elena had told them a carefully unfinished story, that he was a man she had met long ago, that he had to go far away and could not stay, a story that was neither truth nor lie, and she answered no even as she knew it was not true, because the black SUV had dragged her back into the past, back to the night 6 years earlier, back to the man with gray eyes who now looked back at her every day through the faces of her children. It had been Christmas Eve 6 years ago. Elena was 21, working part-time for a catering company to earn extra money during the holidays, 3 years removed from her uncle's house, living in a cheap dormitory, struggling to finish a community college program in business administration, still holding dreams, still believing that if she worked hard enough life would eventually become better. That evening's gala was held at the Plaza Hotel, inside a magnificent ballroom filled with crystal chandeliers and red velvet curtains, and Elena stood among the wealthy, invisible in her simple black and white uniform, carrying a tray of champagne, drifting like a ghost between $1,000 suits and diamond-studded gowns, not knowing or caring whose party it was, focused only on finishing her shift, collecting her pay, and going home. Near 11 at night, the party began to fade, laughter and music thinning as guests departed, and Elena was sent to collect empty glasses on the balcony, where snow was falling outside, white flakes spinning under the city's golden lights. And there he was, standing alone in the storm. He wore a perfectly tailored black three-piece suit around a tall, powerful frame, his tie loosened, the collar of his white shirt open as if he were trying to escape the suffocation of his own clothes, dark, slightly wavy hair damp with snow, a few strands falling across his forehead, leaning against the railing and staring at the Manhattan skyline with distant eyes, as if searching for something he already knew he would never find. Elena stopped at the doorway, forgetting her task, because something about him held her still. Not his striking handsomeness, though it was breathtaking, not the wealth that radiated from every detail, though she guessed the watch on his wrist cost more than her entire year of tuition, but the loneliness, deep and desperate, a loneliness she recognized instantly because she carried the same one inside herself. She spoke without thinking, warning him that he would catch a cold standing out there, and immediately regretted it, knowing she had no right to speak to a guest and might lose her job. But he turned to look at her and all thoughts of rules, of class, of distance dissolved. His eyes were gray, like a sky before a storm, like the ashes of a fire long extinguished, and when he looked at her, Elena felt the strange and unsettling certainty that he was truly seeing her, not a waitress in a cheap uniform, not an invisible girl, but her, the real person beneath it all. "Perhaps catching a cold is not such a terrible thing," he said in a low, slightly hoarse voice, as if he had not spoken to anyone in a long time. "At least then you still feel something." Elena did not know what compelled her to step closer, whether it was the loneliness in his voice, or the fact that it was Christmas Eve and she had no one waiting for her, or the way the falling snow formed a white curtain that cut them off from the rest of the world. But she walked onto the balcony and stood beside him, looking out together at the city glowing in the holiday night, and she introduced herself without knowing why, and after a long silence as though deciding whether to answer at all, he spoke a single word as softly as breath. "Vincent. Just Vincent. No last name. No title. Only a simple name, as if in that moment he wanted to forget who he was." They stood beside one another in silence, letting the snow settle on their shoulders and in their hair, as if time itself had paused, and Elena did not know how long had passed, perhaps 5 minutes, perhaps half an hour. She only knew that she did not want to leave, that there was something about this man that made her feel safe, a feeling she had not known since her parents were still alive. "What do you do here?" Vincent asked, his eyes still fixed on the city below. "Working the party," Elena replied, "earning extra money for the holidays." And he turned to look at her, his gray eyes searching but not judging, and said that she did not belong in a place like this, to which she quietly asked where she was supposed to belong, and he did not answer, only offered a faint, sorrowful smile that never reached his eyes and admitted that he did not know where he belonged either, an answer that surprised her, because a man like him, wealthy and powerful, radiating an authority that made others bow their heads, should never have felt that way. "You are not like the others at the party," she said. "They are laughing and celebrating while you stand out here alone in the snow." And Vincent let out a soft, rough laugh, as if his throat had forgotten how to make that sound, saying that those people were afraid of him, that they laughed because they wanted him pleased, spoke because they wanted something from him, and that none of them truly wanted to be with him. And when she asked why he invited them at all, he answered that it was what had to be done, that it was how his world functioned. Then he looked at her again, and this time there was something different in his eyes, a small flicker of light in the endless gray, telling her that she was different, that she did not know who he was, that she was not afraid of him, that she spoke to him as if he were simply a man standing in the snow. And Elena shrugged and said that to her. That was exactly what he was, a man who looked sad on Christmas Eve. The silence stretched between them again, but it was an easy silence, not awkward or heavy, and the snow began to fall thicker, dusting the railing and settling onto Elena's thin coat, and she started to tremble. Not from the cold, but from having been cold for so long that her body no longer knew how to fight it, and Vincent noticed, slipping off his suit jacket and draping it over her shoulders without a word, the coat warm and heavy, carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne, sandalwood and bergamot, and Elena breathed it in deeply, imprinting that scent into her memory without knowing it would haunt her for the next 6 years. "Tell me about you," Vincent said, his voice soft like a request, and she replied that there was nothing to tell, that she was just an ordinary girl, to which he answered that no one was ordinary, that everyone carried a story. And Elena hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing, unaccustomed to letting anyone see the scars inside her. But something about Vincent, perhaps the loneliness that mirrored her own, perhaps the magic of Christmas Eve, perhaps the way he looked at her as if she were the only person left in the world, made her open up, and she spoke evenly, as though telling someone else's story, saying that her parents had died in a fire when she was 14, that she had been taken in by her uncle who beat her and treated her like a servant, that she ran away at 18 and lived on the streets for 2 years, that now she was trying to attend college and build a life, but sometimes she did not know where she was going. Vincent listened in silence, offering no pity, no empty comfort, and when she finished, he simply nodded, as if he understood the things she could not say, then told her that he too had lost his parents, not in a fire but still a loss, that he had inherited everything from his father, including the things he never wanted, including the man he was forced to become, and that sometimes he looked into the mirror and did not recognize himself. And Elena looked at him and for the first time in many years felt truly understood. Two strangers from different worlds, who in that moment were the same person. Two lonely souls finding one another in a snowstorm. "Stay with me tonight," Vincent said, his voice not a command but a plea, not for money, not for anything else, only because he did not want to be alone on Christmas Eve, and believed that she did not either, and Elena knew she should refuse, knew nothing about this man, knew he could be anyone, could be dangerous, could be the greatest mistake of her life. But when she looked into those gray eyes, she did not see danger, she saw herself. She saw the loneliness she had carried for 7 years since her parents died, and she did not want to be alone anymore, not even for one night, so she agreed, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. That night they did not sleep. They talked until dawn broke, sharing secrets they had never told anyone, laughing at foolish things, crying over their losses, and when the first sunlight of Christmas morning slipped through the window, they were together not as strangers but as two final pieces that had found their place. And Elena did not know that that night would change her life forever, did not know that inside her, 2 small lives would begin from that single night. She only knew that for the first time in a very long while, she felt loved. Sunlight slipped through the curtains and woke Elena, and it took her a few long seconds to remember where she was, in a luxurious hotel room with high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and white silk sheets, the faint scent of sandalwood perfume still lingering on the pillow. But when she turned her head, the other half of the bed was empty, and Vincent was gone. Elena sat up, pulling the sheet to her chest, scanning the room for any sign of him, the black suit no longer draped over the chair, the leather shoes gone from beside the door, the clock on the wall reading 8:15 in the morning, and she wondered when he had left and why he had not woken her. On the bedside table lay a folded piece of white paper, and Elena picked it up with slightly trembling hands and read the 2 short lines written there, telling her he had to leave to handle something urgent, and that he would find her, signed simply, Vincent. No phone number, no address, no last name, only a vague promise and a name. She read the note again and again until every word etched itself into her memory, telling herself she believed him, that she wanted to believe him, because the night before could not have meant nothing, not the way he had looked at her, not the way he had touched her, not the way he had said she made him feel alive. A week passed, then 2, then a month, and Elena waited without knowing exactly what she was waiting for or how he could ever find her when she had left him nothing, no mobile phone because she did not have one then, only a dormitory landline she had never given him, no last name, no profession, nothing beyond the name Vincent and those sad gray eyes. She returned to the Plaza Hotel once and asked the front desk about the Christmas Eve party and a man named Vincent, and they looked at her as if she were unhinged and told her to leave. Slowly, hope faded, and Elena told herself she had been foolish, that she was just a poor catering girl while he belonged to a world of diamonds and champagne, that perhaps that night had been nothing more than a fleeting moment for him, a way to pass time on a lonely Christmas Eve. She began to force herself to forget, focusing on school, on work, on building a future, tucking the note into the bottom of a drawer and trying not to think about it anymore. 2 months after that night, Elena began vomiting every morning, first thinking it was the flu, then spoiled food, until her period failed to come a second time and the truth came knocking. She bought a pregnancy test with the last of her money, locked herself in the dormitory bathroom, and stared at the 2 red lines as they appeared like a death sentence for every dream she had ever held. Pregnant, at 21, with no family, no savings, struggling to finish community college, carrying a child conceived with a man she had no way of finding, a man who had promised to find her and never did. The days that followed were hell. She could not sleep, could not eat, went to work like a hollow body, eyes fixed on nothing, while her mind spun through choices that were not really choices at all. An abortion was impossible without money, and something inside her refused the thought. Giving the baby up brought back memories of her uncle's house and of abandoned children she had met on the streets, and she knew she could not do that either, and keeping the child felt impossible when she could barely keep herself alive. One night, as she lay crying on her dormitory bed with a hand resting on her still flat stomach, she felt something strange, not movement because it was too early, but a connection, an invisible thread binding her to the life growing inside her, and in that moment she knew her decision. She would keep the child, no matter how hard it became, no matter what she had to give up, because this child was her flesh and blood, because this child was the only proof that that night had been real, that she had been loved even if only for a moment, and because she had already lost too much in her life to lose anything more. 3 months later, when the doctor told her she was carrying twins, Elena did not know whether to laugh or cry. 2 children, 2 tiny lives with heartbeats inside her body, and as she stared at the ultrasound screen and watched 2 small shapes moving, she knew her life had changed forever. She dropped out of school, worked 3 jobs, moved into a decaying apartment in the South Bronx because it was the only place she could afford, and 4 months later, in a charity hospital with no one holding her hand, she gave birth to Lucas and Mia, 2 children with dark hair and gray eyes, their father's eyes she would look into every day for the next 6 years, reminding her of the man who had promised to find her and never came. The memory dissolved when Mia's voice pulled Elena back into the present, asking if she was crying, and Elena touched her cheek in surprise at the tears there and said she was not crying, that it was just the wind. But Mia looked at her with gray eyes far too perceptive for a 4-year-old, and Elena knew her daughter did not believe her. She pulled both children close, breathing in the scent of their hair, and told herself that even if Vincent never came looking for her, he had given her the most precious gift of all, these 2 little angels. 3 days had passed since Elena last saw the black SUV, 3 days during which she tried to convince herself that she was imagining things, that no one was following her, that the life of a poor single mother held nothing of interest to anyone, yet the unease would not leave, clinging to her like a shadow and whispering in her mind every time she stepped outside. On Saturday night, Elena finished her shift at the laundromat at 11 o'clock, so exhausted that her legs felt numb and her hands burned raw from pressing clothes for 3 straight hours, knowing the children were at Mrs. Chen's place and had surely been asleep for hours, and all she wanted was to get home, check that Lucas was breathing evenly, then collapse onto the floor and fall into a dreamless sleep. The walk from the laundromat to her apartment usually took 20 minutes, and she normally stayed on the main road where there were streetlights and people even late at night, but the cold was sharper than usual, and the wind cut through her coat, so she chose the shortcut through the alley behind the abandoned warehouses, dark and narrow but 10 minutes shorter, 10 minutes that could mean the difference between her legs carrying her home or giving out entirely. Halfway down the alley she heard footsteps, not 1 person but 2, heavy and slow, deliberately loud enough for her to hear, and she quickened her pace as her heart began to race, telling herself not to turn around and not to show fear, but the footsteps sped up as well, followed by a man's voice cutting through the darkness, rough and thick with alcohol or smoke, asking where she was rushing off to so fast. Elena stopped, and 2 dark figures stepped out ahead of her, blocking the path, one tall and thin with filthy hair and patchy stubble, the other shorter and heavier, holding something that caught the distant streetlight, a knife, and when she turned to run, she saw 2 more shapes behind her. Realizing she was surrounded, she begged them, her voice shaking but steady, saying she had no money and nothing at all, and asking them to let her go. And the tall one laughed, flashing yellowed teeth, saying that if she had no money she had something else, that on a cold night like this, she could keep them warm. As he moved closer, and the stench of alcohol and unwashed flesh filled her nose, forcing her back until her spine hit the cold brick wall, and there was nowhere left to run. She thought of Lucas and Mia, of their gray eyes when they looked at her, of her daughter asking if she was thinking about their father, and she knew she could not die here and could not leave them orphaned, that she had survived hell, survived the streets, survived giving birth alone, and she would survive this night too. The tall man reached for her and Elena twisted aside, raking her nails across his face and feeling skin tear beneath them, and he screamed and struck her hard, sending her to the ground as her head slammed into the wall and the world spun. blood filling her mouth as someone grabbed her hair and yanked her head back. Then everything stopped. A car engine roared. Headlights flooded the alley like light from heaven. Brakes screamed, and footsteps followed. Not the footsteps of thieves, but of a true predator. Slow and certain and deadly, and a voice cut through the darkness like a blade, low and cold, and so full of menace that all four men froze, ordering them to let her go. Elena looked up through blurred vision and saw a figure standing at the mouth of the alley, tall and broad-shouldered, framed by the headlights of the familiar black SUV, unable to see his face clearly but recognizing the way he stood, the way he commanded the space around him, as if the world belonged to him. One of the men demanded to know who he was, his bravado already gone, and the stranger stepped forward, one measured step at a time, until the light revealed sharp features, a faint scar running from temple to cheekbone, and gray eyes, gray like a storm sky, gray like the eyes of her children, as he said calmly that he was the man who would kill them if they did not disappear within 3 seconds, and no one needed to count, because the four men vanished into the darkness like roaches fleeing the light. Elena lay on the cold ground watching him approach, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing, knowing it could not be him. Not after 6 years of waiting, 6 years of resentment, 6 years of trying to forget. And yet there he was, standing before her in a filthy South Bronx alley. He knelt beside her, gently lifting her face to check her injuries, and when his eyes met hers she saw something she had never expected. Not coldness and not distance, but pain, a deep pain that had lived in him for 6 long years, and he spoke her name with a hoarse voice, saying that he had finally found her. And Elena, a woman who had survived everything and forgotten how to cry, did the only thing she could do in that moment. She raised her hand and slapped him across the face. The slap echoed through the silent alley. Vincent did not dodge or raise a hand to block it. He only let his head turn slightly with the force before looking back at her, his cheek reddening while his eyes remained unchanged, still holding that same pain, that same terrifying restraint. "You had every right to do that," he said, his voice low and calm as if being struck were the most ordinary thing in the world. "You can hit me again if you want." Elena sprang to her feet and backed away from him as though he were fire and she would burn if she came any closer. 6 years, she shouted, her voice breaking with rage, and something else she refused to name. 6 years, Vincent. You vanished for 6 years, and now you show up saying you found me. What do you think I am? Something you forgot and decided to reclaim whenever it suited you. Elena, let me explain. Explain what she cut in, stepping forward and pointing straight at his face. Explain why you left without a word. Explain why you promised to find me and never came. I waited, Vincent. I waited like an idiot. I even went back to the Plaza Hotel asking about you, and they looked at me like I was insane. Vincent closed his eyes, his jaw tightening as if he were enduring physical pain. I know, he said quietly. I know you went back. I know everything. Then why? Elena asked, her voice no longer screaming but reduced to a whisper that hurt more than any shout. Why didn't you come? Vincent opened his eyes, and this time she saw something different in that gray gaze. He removed his suit jacket and began unbuttoning his shirt, and Elena stepped back in confusion. What are you doing? But he did not answer, only pulled the shirt aside to bare his chest, and Elena stopped breathing. 3 scars. 3 round scars the size of coins scattered across his chest and abdomen, gunshot wounds. That morning after I left the hotel room, I went to handle something, Vincent said evenly as though telling someone else's story. Someone in my organization betrayed me, and I had to deal with it before it hurt more people, but I was ambushed. 3 bullets, 1 to the shoulder, 1 to the chest, 1 that nearly hit my heart. Elena stared at the scars, her mind refusing to process the words. Organization. Betrayal. Who are you? I am someone you should never have met, Vincent said as he buttoned his shirt again. I am the head of an empire you would never want to know about. A man with enemies everywhere. A man people are willing to kill to take his place. That is why I left you nothing. That is why I never wanted to drag you into my world. Elena shook her head, trying to understand. But you said you would find me, and I did try, Vincent said, stepping closer, urgency in his voice. I spent 3 months in the hospital, 3 months between life and death, and when I recovered, the first thing I did was look for you, but you left me nothing, Elena. No phone number, no address, no last name, only a first name. Do you know how many women named Elena there are in New York? Elena fell silent. I hired people to look for you for 6 years, Vincent continued, each word pulled from deep inside his chest. 6 years, Elena. Every day I thought of you. Every night I remembered that Christmas Eve, you were the only person who ever saw me. Not Vincent Callahan, the boss, but Vincent, a lonely man standing in the snow. Do you really think I could forget that? I do not believe you, Elena said, though her voice weakened. You are a powerful man with an entire empire. How could you not find one woman if you truly wanted to? Because you are very good at disappearing, Vincent replied with a bitter half-smile. You changed addresses 4 times in 6 years. You have no social media, no proper bank accounts, nothing traceable. You live like a ghost, Elena. And I, a man who controls this city, could not find you. It tormented me every single day. Elena wanted to keep doubting, wanted to cling to her anger like armor, but she looked at the scars on his chest, at the pain in his eyes, at the way he stood before her like a sinner awaiting judgment, and her certainty began to crack. Then why now? She asked wearily. Why, after 6 years, did you finally find me? A month ago, one of my men happened to eat at the diner where you work, Vincent said. He recognized you from a photograph I still keep, he told me, and I have been watching you since then to be sure it was really you. The black SUV, Elena whispered. It was yours. Vincent nodded. I knew you noticed. I planned to approach you differently, more gently, but then tonight happened and I could not stand by. Elena stood in the dark alley, facing the man before her, the father of her children, the man who had haunted her dreams for 6 years, and she wanted to believe him. Part of her desperately wanted to believe, but she had been hurt too many times, abandoned too many times, and she no longer knew how to trust. I need to go home, she said flatly. My children are waiting. Let me take you home, Vincent offered. No. The car stopped in front of Elena's decaying apartment building, and she was about to open the door and get out as quickly as possible, to end this insane night and forget everything, when the building door suddenly opened and Mrs. Chen stepped into the hallway light, holding Lucas and Mia by the hands, her aged face tight with worry under the weak yellow glow. Elena froze. No. Not now. Not like this. My child. I heard a strange car and brought the kids down to see if it was you, Mrs. Chen called out, squinting at the sleek black SUV parked outside. And Lucas spotted his mother, calling out sleepily as he let go of Mrs. Chen's hand and ran toward the car, with Mia following, her small feet quick against the damp pavement. Elena rushed out of the vehicle, trying to stop them, but she was too late. Lucas had already reached Vincent's door and was staring inside with wide eyes, and Vincent, who had planned to stay in the car as she asked, turned to look at the boy. Time seemed to stop. Elena saw the moment unfold like slow motion. Vincent looking at Lucas, Lucas looking at Vincent. 2 gray eyes meeting for the first time. So identical it was like staring into a mirror, the same storm gray color, the same slight upward tilt at the corners, the same bottomless depth. Vincent stepped out of the car as if pulled by something beyond his control, dropped to his knees to be level with Lucas, his hands trembling as he lifted them as though he wanted to touch the child but did not dare, and the face of the most powerful man on the East Coast, a face that never revealed emotion, shattered like glass. Son, he whispered, his voice breaking. How old are you? Lucas tilted his head, unafraid, only curious. I am 5. Who are you? 5. Vincent echoed, as if hearing an answer he had already known. Exactly 6 years. Exactly the span of time since that Christmas night. Mia squeezed in beside her brother, tugging at Vincent's sleeve, and announcing that she was Mia, that she was also 5, that she and Lucas were twins, unaware that her innocent words were tearing the man's heart apart. Vincent looked up at Elena, his gray eyes filled with thousands of questions and emotions, his voice shaking and stripped of all cold authority as he asked why she had not told him. 6 years, Elena. 6 years he searched for her. Why she had not told him. How could I tell you? Elena replied, her own voice trembling just as much. I did not know who you were. I did not know how to find you. You disappeared, Vincent. You left a note and vanished. How was I supposed to tell someone who did not exist? Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway, staring in confusion and asking what was happening and who the man was. And Elena did not know how to answer as she looked at Vincent kneeling on the cold sidewalk, at Lucas and Mia studying the stranger with curiosity, at the life she had hidden for 6 years now exposed under the weak streetlight. Are you my mom's friend? Lucas asked, tilting his head. Your eyes look just like mine. Vincent swallowed, his hand trembling as he brushed the boy's cheek so lightly as if afraid the child might shatter, and said hoarsely that yes, he was an old friend of their mother. Elena felt her chest tighten as she stepped forward and gently pulled the children back to her, saying it was late and they needed to sleep, thanking Mrs. Chen and telling her to go rest, and though Mrs. Chen was full of questions, she understood and nodded, casting one last assessing look at Vincent, before turning back inside. Elena led the children toward the door when Vincent called her name, and she stopped without turning around as his voice followed her into the night, heavy with resolve and pain, saying he would not disappear again, that they were his children, that he had the right to know and to be with them. Elena turned back, anger flashing in her eyes as she asked what right he thought he had after not existing in their lives for 5 years, telling him she had raised them alone, stayed awake through the nights when they were sick, worked 3 jobs so they could eat, asking where he had been when Lucas had an asthma attack in the early morning and she had no money for medicine, where he had been when Mia asked why she did not have a father like other children. Vincent stood there, taking every word like a blade, not defending himself, not arguing, only enduring because he knew her anger was deserved, knew he had lost the first 5 years of his children's lives without choosing to. He apologized, 2 simple words heavy as mountains, admitting it was not enough but promising he would not disappear again and would take responsibility, and Elena told him she did not need his responsibility or anything from him, only for him to answer that the children did, that they deserved to know who their father was. She said nothing more, turned away, and led the children inside without looking back. But before the door closed, Vincent pressed a black card with elegant silver lettering and a phone number into her hand, telling her in a voice soft as breath to call whenever she needed, day or night, that he would always be there. The door closed. Elena stood in the dark hallway gripping the card as she listened to the car drive away into the night. And for the first time in a very long while, she had no idea what to do next. 3 days after seeing Vincent again, Elena tried to live as though nothing had changed. She still woke at 4 every morning, still worked 3 jobs, still came home exhausted and slept holding her children on the thin mattress. The black business card lay hidden in a drawer, not thrown away but never looked at, and she kept telling herself she did not need him, that she had survived 5 years without him and could continue to do so, but fate had its own way of proving her wrong. On the 4th night, Lucas suffered an asthma attack at 2 in the morning, and this time it was different. This time he was not only wheezing but turning blue, his lips losing color, his chest heaving as if fighting for the last scraps of air. Elena used the new inhaler once, twice, 3 times, but it did nothing, and Lucas lay in her arms with his eyes rolling back, his small body convulsing from lack of oxygen. Mia cried from the corner of the room, curled into a tiny ball, asking through tears what was happening to her brother and whether he was going to die. And Elena screamed no in a voice cracked with terror, telling Mia to stay put while she took Lucas to the hospital. She ran out of the apartment carrying her son, not stopping to put on a coat for either of them, the December night wind slicing into her skin like knives. Yet she felt nothing but the weight of Lucas in her arms, heavy as lead, the weak, gasping breaths growing fainter by the second, and she ran down the stairs and into the street toward the public hospital 8 blocks away, with no money for a taxi and no phone call for an ambulance, because a private emergency ride cost $2,000 she did not have. 8 blocks. She ran as she had never run before, her lungs burning, her legs screaming, but she did not slow. The South Bronx streets at 2 in the morning, empty and dangerous, yet none of it mattered, only her son's skin shifting from blue to gray, only the gray eyes now tightly shut. When she burst into the emergency room at Lincoln Hospital, Lucas had stopped convulsing, and she did not know whether that was good or bad. Nurses took him from her arms, placed him on a gurney, and disappeared behind the doors of intensive care, leaving Elena standing there with empty hands and an empty chest, staring at the closed doors as if they had swallowed her entire world. 3 hours later, a doctor came out and told her Lucas was stable but needed to be admitted for monitoring, that he required specialized medication, extensive testing, and a specialist, with an estimated cost of $5,000 that could rise to $10,000 if complications arose. Elena stood in the fluorescent-lit hallway, hearing those numbers like a death sentence. $5,000. When she earned about $90 a day on a good day, nearly 2 months of work if she did not eat, did not pay rent, did not spend a cent, and her son needed treatment now, not 2 months later. She signed the hospital debt forms with shaking hands and was led into the room where Lucas lay, connected to oxygen, tubing, and wires, his small body rising and falling steadily with the help of machines, and Elena pulled up a chair, took his tiny hand, and sat in silence, staring at his pale face. It was 4 in the morning, and Mia was alone at home, and Elena had called Mrs. Chen from a public phone, asking her to check on her daughter, and the 70-year-old woman had not asked a single question, only said she was coming immediately, another stranger helping her, when she had nothing to give in return. Elena sat beside her son's bed, staring at the stark white ceiling, thinking about her life, how she had fought for 27 years, fought to survive after her parents died, fought to escape her uncle, fought to raise 2 children alone, yet some battles could not be won with willpower, and some walls could not be broken with effort, and $5,000 was one of those walls. Her hand slipped into her pocket, where the black business card still rested, carried with her for reasons she could not fully explain. Perhaps because she did not trust leaving it at home, perhaps because some part of her had known this day would come. She took it out and looked at the elegant silver lettering, Vincent Callahan, and the phone number beneath it. Remembering his words that he would always be there, knowing he was a man of power and blood and diamonds, and that calling him meant pulling him into her life and her children's lives, a line she had never wanted to cross. She looked at Lucas, small and fragile, fighting to breathe, his gray eyes closed, eyes exactly like his father's, and she thought of everything she had sacrificed, school, dreams, youth, of going hungry so her children could eat, of sleepless nights so they could stay warm, and she knew she would do anything for them, even swallow her pride. At 5 in the morning, in the quiet hospital room filled only with the steady beeping of monitors, Elena dialed the number on the card. The phone rang once, twice, and then someone answered. Elena. Vincent's voice came through, alert as if he had not slept at all, asking what was wrong, and Elena opened her mouth but no words came. 6 years of never asking for help, 6 years of telling herself she needed no one, collapsing in that moment beside her son's bed. Lucas, she finally said, her voice breaking. Our son is in the hospital. I do not know what to do anymore. There was silence for a second, then another, and then Vincent's voice returned, cold and sharp as steel, telling her he was coming and not to go anywhere. The line went dead, and Elena sat there with the phone still in her hand, looking at her son, not knowing whether she had done the right thing or the wrong one, only knowing she had crossed a line she could never step back over, and that for better or worse, her life would never be the same again. Vincent appeared at the hospital within 20 minutes, and Elena did not know how he managed to get there so fast at 5 in the morning, but she did not ask, because he entered the ward like a storm, carrying an air of authority so overwhelming that even the nurses instinctively stepped aside, wearing a long black coat, his hair slightly disheveled as if he had leapt straight out of bed, yet his gray eyes were fully awake and razor-sharp. Move the boy to the best private room, he ordered the night nurse in a voice that allowed no argument. Call the top pediatric pulmonologist in this hospital. I want full diagnostics, the best medication, the best of everything. Cost is not an issue. The nurse looked at him, then at Elena, then back at him and asked who he was, and Vincent replied without hesitation that he was the boy's father and told them to do exactly as he said. Everything happened at a dizzying pace. Lucas was transferred to a spacious private room with windows overlooking a garden. A specialist arrived in the middle of the night, something unheard of in a public hospital without money or power. Advanced medications were administered, modern equipment installed, and within hours the bare hospital room Elena could never have afforded had transformed into a space with everything money could buy. Elena sat in the corner watching Vincent manage it all, with the cold efficiency of a man accustomed to giving orders, wanting to object, wanting to say she did not need his help, but then she looked at Lucas on the bed, his color returning, his breathing steadying, and she swallowed every protest, because pride meant nothing compared to her child's life. When things finally stabilized, Vincent pulled up a chair beside Lucas's bed, and Elena witnessed something she never expected. The powerful man who had bent an entire hospital to his will now sitting there with eyes rimmed red, his hand trembling as he brushed his son's dark hair with a gentleness, as if the boy might shatter. I am sorry, Vincent whispered hoarsely. I am sorry I was not here. I am sorry you had to suffer alone. Elena looked at him, and for the first time in 6 years, she did not see Vincent Callahan the kingpin, but Vincent from that Christmas night, the lonely man standing in the snow, who had let her see the vulnerability he hid from the world, realizing he was still there beneath the steel armor. Still that same man. At 6 in the morning, Lucas opened his eyes, took a few seconds to understand where he was, then noticed Vincent sitting beside him, and murmured weakly but with a hint of delight that the man's eyes looked just like his. adding that his mother always said his eyes were like his father's, and asking if Vincent was his father. A question that froze the room as Elena held her breath, and Vincent looked at his son, then at her as if asking permission, and she realized she no longer had the strength to lie. So she nodded faintly. Vincent turned back to Lucas, his gray eyes shining, and said, "Yes, my son, I am your father." And Lucas did not cry, or ask why his father had not been there, or express anger. He only smiled sleepily, and asked if his father could tell him a story, because he was sleepy, and his mother was not as good at stories as Mrs. Chen. And Vincent laughed through tears and agreed, promising to tell him any story he wanted. Elena stood in the doorway watching father and son together for the first time, her heart aching not with anger or resentment but with something else entirely, perhaps regret, perhaps hope. She did not know. She only knew that the wall she had built around herself for 6 years was crumbling piece by piece, and she no longer had the strength to rebuild it. Lucas was discharged from the hospital after 5 days, the doctor saying he had fully recovered but needed a better living environment, cleaner air, no mold, no rats like the apartment in the South Bronx, and Elena knew exactly what that meant. She could not take her son back there, but she had nowhere else to go. Vincent was already waiting in the hospital lobby beside the familiar black SUV. He said nothing, only opened the car door and waited, and Elena wanted to refuse, wanted to say she could manage on her own, but the words died in her throat when she looked at Lucas in her arms, still weak and pale, then at Mia clutching her coat with worried gray eyes, and she understood she no longer had the right to be stubborn. The car did not head toward the South Bronx, and Elena realized it when they turned toward Brooklyn, asking sharply where he was taking them, and Vincent answered calmly without taking his eyes off the road that he was taking them home, their children's home. The apartment was on the 5th floor of a quiet brownstone building in Brooklyn Heights, and when Vincent opened the door, Elena froze as if nailed in place. The space was 5 times larger than where she had lived, with high ceilings, wide, sunlit windows, polished wooden floors, and warm, welcoming furnishings. 2 separate bedrooms, one for her and one for the children, with blue bunk beds she knew Lucas would love, a fully equipped kitchen, a living room with soft couches, and a balcony overlooking a small park below. Mia let go of her hand and ran inside like a freed bird, asking if this was really their home, marveling at her own beautiful bed and the toys waiting there. And Lucas slipped from her arms to follow, his eyes shining as he asked Vincent hopefully if he had bought all this for them. Vincent knelt to his son's level and said gently that this was their home and that they deserved to live somewhere good. Elena stood at the doorway without stepping inside, her hand gripping the doorframe as if it were the only thing keeping her upright, looking at the apartment, at her children laughing, and feeling a storm of emotions tear through her. Part of her wanting to cry with happiness because her children finally had a proper home, part of her wanting to scream in anger because she had struggled for 6 years while he could give them this life with a snap of his fingers, and part of her wanting to run because accepting this help meant owing him, depending on him, losing control of her own life. She said stiffly that she could not accept this, that it was too much, and she did not want to owe him, and Vincent stepped closer and told her this was not charity, but his responsibility to his children, that he had missed the first 5 years of their lives, that he could not change the past but could give them a better future, and that she could refuse anything from him but should not refuse what was best for the children. Elena wanted to argue, to find a reason to say no, but then she heard Lucas and Mia laughing from the bedroom, a clear, bright laughter she had rarely heard in the old, crumbling apartment, and she looked at the clean kitchen where she could cook real meals instead of bread with peanut butter, looked at the large windows where sunlight would pour in every morning instead of damp darkness, and she realized she had no right to refuse, not because of him but because of them. She finally agreed, her voice heavy as if blocked by stone, saying she would keep working, that she would pay rent when she could, that she did not want to live depending on him, and Vincent looked at her with an unreadable expression before nodding and saying it was up to her, that he would not force her into anything, asking only one thing, to be allowed to see the children, because he had already missed too much and did not want to miss any more. Elena looked at him, then at Lucas and Mia playing inside, their faces brighter than she had ever seen them, and she sighed, understanding that no matter how much resentment she carried, she had no right to take their father away from them, that they needed him, and perhaps, though she did not want to admit it, she needed someone to share the burden as well, and she agreed, stepping over the threshold into the new apartment and telling him he could come see the children. The first week in the new apartment passed like a dream Elena did not dare believe was real. Every morning she woke on a soft bed with crisp white sheets, sunlight flooding the room, and it took her several seconds to remember she was no longer in the crumbling South Bronx apartment. There were no rats scratching inside the walls, no damp, moldy smell, no bone-deep cold from a broken heater, only a quiet peace and the sound of birds outside the window. Vincent kept his promise. He came every day after work, usually around 6 in the evening, and he never arrived empty-handed. The first day with Lego building sets for Lucas, the second with a doll for Mia, the third with comic books, the fourth with chocolate ice cream and cookies. And Elena wanted to protest, wanted to tell him he was spoiling the children, but she stayed silent when she saw the way their eyes lit up every time the doorbell rang. Lucas opened up first. The boy was quiet and observant by nature, yet something about Vincent drew him in like a magnet, perhaps the identical gray eyes, perhaps the calm warmth in Vincent's voice when he told stories. And on the third day, Lucas tugged Vincent by the hand into his bedroom to show him his small book collection, the spines worn from repeated reading, asking with hope whether his father had read that one yet, and Vincent answered that he had not, and asked if Lucas would tell him about it. And they sat on the bunk bed for an entire hour while Lucas eagerly explained every book and Vincent listened as though it were the most important lesson of his life. Mia was different. She attached herself to Vincent from the very first day without hesitation, climbing into his lap to demand fairy tales, then the next day insisting he play princess and knight, with Vincent cast as the knight's horse crawling around the living room while Mia rode on his back, and Elena stood in the kitchen doorway watching the most powerful man on the East Coast crawl across the floor and neigh like a horse, unsure whether to laugh or cry. On the 5th day, Vincent taught Lucas to play chess, and the boy learned with astonishing speed, grasping the basic moves after only 3 games. And Vincent told him proudly that he was very smart, just like his mother, a sentence Elena overheard while washing dishes that made her heart tighten for reasons she could not explain. On the 6th day, Mia had a nightmare in the middle of the night, and as Elena rushed toward her room, she saw Vincent already there, sitting on the edge of the bed with his daughter in his arms, singing softly, his voice low and slightly off-key. Yet Mia gradually stopped crying and fell asleep, and Elena realized Vincent had stayed the night on the living room sofa instead of leaving, though she did not know when that had begun. On the 7th day, Elena came home from Lucia's diner earlier than usual, opened the door, and froze. Vincent was in the kitchen teaching the children how to bake cookies, flour smeared across Mia's face, Lucas carefully cutting dough into star shapes with intense concentration, and Vincent, the man in $1,000 suits, stood there wearing a pink Hello Kitty apron, holding a wooden spoon with white flour dusting his face. Mia squealed that her mother was home and ran to hug her legs, proudly announcing that her father had taught her to bake and that she had made a heart-shaped cookie just for her. And Elena looked from the crooked cookie in her daughter's hand to Vincent standing there, slightly embarrassed in the pink apron but smiling with his eyes. And for the first time since they reunited, she saw him truly smile, not a polite smile or a bitter one, but the smile of a man who was happy. He apologized for the apron as if reading her thoughts and said it was the only one he could find. And Elena looked at him, at the children, at the kitchen covered in flour and filled with laughter, and felt something stir in her chest, something warm and dangerous she did not dare name, because she had built a wall around her heart for 6 years, and that wall was beginning to crack with every day. Vincent stepped deeper into their lives. She told him softly that it was fine, and that pink suited him, and Vincent laughed, his laughter blending with the children's until the apartment filled with a sound Elena once believed she would never hear again, the sound of a family. Elena continued working at Lucia's diner, even though Vincent suggested she stop, because she needed that independence, needed to know that if one day he disappeared again, she could still stand on her own feet, and Lucia did not ask many questions about the changes in her life, only remarked that the girl looked less like a corpse these days, which Elena understood was simply her way of caring. One evening at the end of the second weekend, Elena came home earlier than expected because the diner was slow. She opened the door and stopped at the threshold, her heart skipping a beat, because in the kitchen, Vincent was decorating cupcakes with the children, Mia standing on a tall chair carefully spreading frosting with a seriousness that was almost comical, Lucas sitting beside her reading instructions aloud from a baking book, and Vincent, still wearing the Hello Kitty apron that had somehow become his kitchen uniform, helping Mia steady the piping bag. The scene was so ordinary it hurt. This was the life Elena had longed for over 6 years, the life she had believed she would never have. A family, a father for her children, a man in a small kitchen helping them bake in the evening. "Mom's home," Lucas said, looking up at her with a rare smile. "Dad is teaching us to make cakes for you. It's a surprise. Elena stepped inside, forcing a smile while a storm raged inside her. It really is a surprise. They look beautiful. After the children went to bed, Elena and Vincent sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of hot tea. The first time they had been alone together since the night in the alley, and she did not know what to say. 6 years of silence had carved too wide a gap, though the past 2 weeks had begun to narrow it. "You are still working at the diner," Vincent said, breaking the silence. "I know you need your independence, but I want you to know, you do not have to work yourself to exhaustion anymore. I can take care of you and the children." Elena looked down at the tea in her hands and said she knew, but she did not want to depend on anyone, that she had taken care of herself since she was 18. That was how she survived. Vincent was quiet for a moment, then asked gently if she could tell him about those years, about her uncle, because he wanted to understand. Elena hesitated, unaccustomed to sharing, unaccustomed to letting anyone see the scars inside her. Yet there was something in Vincent's gray eyes, the patience and the waiting without demand, that made her open up. She told him that after her parents died in a fire she was 14 and had no one, that her uncle took her in for the government stipend, not out of love, that he treated her like unpaid help, made her cook, clean, wash clothes, and beat her when she made mistakes, showing him the scar on her wrist from the night he pushed her down the stairs for breaking a plate. Vincent said nothing, but she saw his jaw tighten and his hand clench on the table. She told him she endured 4 years, then ran away at 18, lived on the streets for 2 years, sleeping in parks and bus stations, doing any job she could find, washing dishes, waiting tables, cleaning toilets, until she began to stabilize, to attend college, to hope again, and then she met him. "That Christmas night," Vincent said quietly. "That Christmas night," Elena repeated, telling him he was the first beautiful thing that had happened to her in many years, and then he disappeared, and though she thought she was used to loss, losing him was different. Silence stretched between them before Vincent spoke hoarsely, saying he too lost his parents early, that his mother died giving birth to him, that his father raised him alone but was not a good man, that he had been the boss before Vincent and taught him that emotions were weakness, that trusting someone was suicide, that power was the only thing that mattered, that Vincent grew up in a world of blood and violence and did not know how to love until he met her. Elena looked at him in surprise, realizing he had never told anyone this. "Because I never wanted to," Vincent said, holding her gaze. "But you are different. From that first night you were different. You saw me, not the boss, not the man people feared, but me, Vincent, a lonely man standing in the snow." They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, only a short distance apart, yet separated by something vast, and Elena felt her heart beating faster, felt the wall she had built around herself cracking piece by piece. She wanted to stand up and run, to protect herself from being hurt again, but her legs would not move. Vincent reached out and lightly touched her hand on the table, just a gentle touch, yet it sent a current through her, and she did not pull away because she could not. "I am not asking for anything," Vincent said softly. "I know you need time. I only want you to know that I will wait. I waited 6 years. I can wait longer." Elena looked into his eyes, deep into that storm-gray gaze, and saw a sincerity she had believed no longer existed in any man, and she wanted to believe, part of her aching to believe, yet she had been hurt too many times. She pulled her hand back and stood up, saying she needed to sleep, and thanking him for the evening, her voice trembling, and Vincent nodded without pressing her, wishing her good night. Elena went into the bedroom, closed the door, and leaned against it, her heart racing, her hand still warm where he had touched her, and she knew that no matter how hard she tried, the wall around her heart now held cracks that could never be sealed. 2 months passed and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Vincent came by every day. The children called him Dad as naturally as if he had never been absent, and Elena began to allow herself to hope perhaps everything would be all right. Perhaps they could build something resembling a normal life. But normal never lasted in the world of Vincent Callahan. On a Wednesday afternoon, Elena went to pick up the children from preschool as usual, stepped through the gate, and froze. A strange man was standing by the fence speaking to Mia through a gap, tall and lean, in a black leather jacket with slicked back blonde hair, and when he turned toward Elena, the smile on his lips made her blood run cold. She called Mia sharply and urgently to come to her at once, and the little girl, startled by her mother's tone, obeyed, gripping Elena's hand and asking innocently whether it was all right that the man had asked her name and her father's name. And before Elena could answer, the man spoke, addressing her calmly as if commenting on the weather, saying he had a message for her boyfriend, and that she should tell Callahan that Derek Novak sent his regards, and that the children were very lovely, and it would be such a shame if anything happened to them. Then he smiled again. A smile that never reached his ice-cold eyes, turned away, and vanished into the flow of pedestrians as though he had never been there. Elena stood frozen, heart pounding like a drum, her grip on Mia's hand so tight the child whimpered in pain. She pulled Lucas out of the schoolyard without a word and hurried them home at nearly a run, her mind spinning. Novak. She had heard that name in one of Vincent's phone calls the week before when he thought she was not listening. An enemy, a rival, and now he knew about the children. Back in the apartment, Elena locked the door, checked the windows, and dialed Vincent's number with trembling fingers. He answered after the first ring, and when she told him someone had approached the children at school, that the man said his name was Derek Novak, that he knew about their children and had threatened them, silence stretched for a second, then another, before Vincent's voice came through, cold as steel and sharp as a blade, telling her to stay inside, lock the doors, open to no one, and that he was coming. Vincent arrived 15 minutes later with Marcus and 3 other men Elena had never seen before, all in black suits with faces carved from ice, and the way they positioned themselves around the apartment made her understand these were not ordinary guards but professional killers. Vincent pulled her into the bedroom and closed the door so the children would not hear, telling her to recount everything, and though his voice was controlled, she saw his jaw clenched and his fists tightening until the knuckles went white, and when she finished, he closed his eyes and drew a deep breath as if restraining an explosion of rage. "Novak is my rival," Vincent said evenly and dangerously. "He controls Chicago and wants to expand into New York. The fact that he knows about you and the children means he is using them to pressure me." And Elena answered with a trembling voice and unyielding eyes that this was exactly why she feared Vincent's world, that she had known this day would come, that his children would become targets, and Vincent took her shoulders and looked straight into her eyes, promising he would not let anyone touch the children or her, that from now on the children would have protection 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that he would handle Novak. Elena asked how, though she already knew the answer, and Vincent did not reply. He did not need to. His storm-gray eyes said everything, and in that moment Elena did not see the man who baked cookies with her children, but Vincent Callahan, the boss who built his empire on blood and fear, and she shivered not from fear but from the far more frightening realization that she trusted him, trusted that he would protect his family at any cost. And she did not know whether that should make her feel safe or more afraid than ever. Life changed completely after the day Novak appeared. The children were no longer allowed to go anywhere alone. Every trip to school or anywhere else came with 2 large men walking behind them, faces carved from stone and eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Lucas said nothing as usual, quiet and observant, but Elena saw the fear flicker in his gray eyes whenever he looked at the guards, while Mia asked endless questions, asking why the men followed her and whether they were bad people, and Elena never knew how to answer. She felt suffocated. The apartment that had once felt warm now felt like a luxurious prison. Someone was always stationed outside the door. Every time she stepped outside, a car followed. She could go nowhere without reporting, do nothing without supervision, and although she understood Vincent was protecting them, it did nothing to ease the tightness in her chest. 1 week after the encounter with Novak, Elena confronted Vincent, telling him with a voice trembling from anger and exhaustion that this was not a life, that the children could not live like this, that they were trapped inside his golden cage. And Vincent answered with controlled restraint that he was trying to protect them, that Novak was dangerous and he could not take risks. And Elena asked how long they were supposed to live in fear. A month, a year, forever. And Vincent fell silent, without an answer. And that silence said more than words ever could. On the 10th night since everything began, Elena was asleep when gunshots tore through the darkness. She jolted upright, heart racing, and ran to the children's room, finding Lucas and Mia awake, clinging to each other on the bed with faces pale in terror, Mia crying and asking what was happening, and Elena held them tightly, telling them everything was fine even as her own body shook, telling them she was there. Outside the room there were running footsteps, shouted commands, the roar of engines, and Elena stayed where she was, clutching the children, afraid to step out, not knowing what was happening, until the door burst open and Vincent appeared, face tense, a gun in his hand, telling her sharply to get the children dressed because they had to leave immediately, and when she asked what happened while hurriedly pulling jackets onto Lucas and Mia, he said someone had tried to break in, The security team had stopped it, but the situation was no longer safe, and he had to move them, telling her they were going to a safe house in the suburbs, known only to him and Marcus. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to say she would not run, that she would not live a life controlled by fear, but then she looked at the children in her arms, at Lucas trying to be brave with terror filling his gray eyes, at Mia sobbing softly and clutching her clothes, and she knew this was not the moment for stubbornness, so she agreed in a voice of surrender, telling him he owed her an explanation. Vincent nodded and led them out through the back exit where a black SUV waited with its engine running. Marcus behind the wheel with an icy face and worried eyes, and as the car sped into the night, Elena looked out the window and saw two men in handcuffs at the foot of the building, blood smeared across their faces. Vincent's guards standing around them with guns still in hand. She turned back to Vincent, sitting beside her with a face like stone, and whispered so the children sleeping against her would not hear, asking who he really was and what kind of world he lived in where people tried to kill his children. And Vincent looked at her with storm-darkened gray eyes and said he lived in a world she never should have entered. But now it was too late to turn back, and that he would do anything to protect the people he loved. Elena said nothing. She only held the children tighter and stared out the window as the city receded into darkness, wondering whether her life would ever be normal again, or whether she had stepped into the world of Vincent Callahan with no path left to return. The safe house was a 2-story villa hidden deep in the forest outside the city. A 2-hour drive from New York, surrounded by high walls, surveillance cameras, and guards patrolling 24 hours a day. And when Elena looked at the place, she saw another prison, simply more luxurious and wrapped in greenery. The children felt differently. Lucas and Mia treated it like a holiday, with wide gardens to run through, a playroom overflowing with toys, and an indoor swimming pool they had never seen in real life. They did not understand why they were there, did not sense the danger closing in, and Elena wanted to preserve that innocence for as long as she could. 2 weeks passed under constant tension. Vincent came whenever he could, but he was busier than ever. His phone never stopped ringing. Secret meetings with Marcus, night trips he did not explain, and Elena saw the exhaustion in him, the dark circles deepening under his eyes, the weight on his shoulders growing heavier by the day. Yet she remained distant, unable to forgive that her life and her children's lives had been turned upside down because of his world. On the 14th night, after the children had fallen asleep, Elena went downstairs and found Vincent sitting alone in the dark. No lights on, no drink in his hand, just staring out the window as if searching the night sky for answers. She stood in the doorway, hesitating, then finally went to sit beside him and asked softly if he could not sleep. And he answered without turning that he could not, and that he was thinking. When she asked what about, he was silent for a long time before looking at her, and in the darkness his gray eyes looked like bottomless pits as he said quietly and wearily that he was losing control, that Novak had bought off some of his men. That was how Novak learned about her and the children, and how he sent someone to break into the apartment that night. And Elena felt the blood rush to her head when she realized his own people had betrayed him. And Vincent told her that in his world loyalty was bought with money and fear, and when someone paid more or inspired greater terror, loyalty shifted, that he had always known this but never thought it would reach her and the children. When she asked what happened now, struggling to keep the fear out of her voice, Vincent let out a heavy sigh as if carrying a mountain on his chest, and said he had one choice: all-out war with Novak, or giving up part of his territory in exchange for peace. And when she asked what war meant, he told her it meant blood, years of violence, constant danger for her and the children, and the real possibility that he would not survive. And when she asked about surrender, he said it meant losing part of the empire he had built his entire life, showing weakness to his enemies, and inviting others to challenge him. Elena looked at him and saw the struggle in his eyes, the battle between the boss and the father, between power and family, and asked what he would choose. And Vincent met her gaze in the dark and said hoarsely that before finding her again he would have chosen war without hesitation, because power was the only thing he knew and the only thing he had. But now he no longer knew. When she asked why, even though she already understood, he reached out and gently touched her cheek as if afraid she might disappear, and said it was because of her, because of Lucas and Mia, because for the first time in his life he had something more precious than power. He had a family. Elena felt her heart tighten, wanting to retreat, to protect herself, to avoid being drawn any deeper into him. Yet when she looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity and pain there, she could not move, and she told him with a trembling voice that she was not asking him to give up everything. She only needed to know that they were not a second choice, that when he made his decision, they would come first. Vincent took her hand and held it tightly, and said like a vow that the children had never been a second choice. That from the night 6 years ago she had changed everything, that she was the first person who ever made him want to become better, and now with Lucas and Mia he finally had a reason to truly change. They sat there in the darkness, hand in hand without another word, and Elena realized the wall she had built around her heart had completely fallen. She had let Vincent in, knowing it could hurt her more than anything ever had. But perhaps that was the price of love, and perhaps she was finally willing to pay it. The next morning, Vincent convened a meeting with his core team in the study of the villa. Elena was not allowed to attend, but she could hear raised voices echoing down the hallway. Marcus's voice the loudest, filled with anger and resistance, telling Vincent he could not do this, that it was a display of weakness, that others would exploit it, and everything he had built would collapse. Then Vincent's voice cut through, cold and sharp as steel, saying he did not care, that he had made his decision, and that anyone who disagreed could leave immediately. And then there was silence. No one left. That afternoon, Vincent met Elena before heading out, dressed in a black three-piece suit, his face hard and resolute, yet when he looked at her his eyes softened, telling her he was going to meet Novak to negotiate an end to all this. And Elena felt her heart tighten as she asked if he would be safe, and Vincent replied that he always was, though she saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, promising he would be back before the children woke up, bending to place a gentle kiss on her forehead before turning away and leaving. And Elena stood in the doorway watching until the black SUV disappeared down the forest road. The negotiation took place at a neutral hotel in Manhattan, territory belonging to no one. Vincent entered the conference room with Marcus at his side, a gun concealed beneath his vest ready for anything, and Derek Novak was already seated at the head of the table, blonde hair slicked back, a cold smile on his lips, mocking Vincent by saying he never expected the day Callahan would bow to come so soon, asking if it was because of the little woman and the 2 children, and Vincent showed no emotion as he pulled out a chair, sat down, placed both hands on the table, and looked straight into Novak's eyes, saying he was there to negotiate, not to listen to nonsense, and asking what Novak wanted. And Novak leaned back smugly, demanding 30% of Vincent's southern territory, the shipping routes through Newark Port, and $5 million as a gesture of peace. The room fell silent. Marcus stood behind Vincent with fists clenched but said nothing. And Vincent remained still, his face like stone as his mind calculated 30% of territory was an empire built over 10 years. The shipping routes were a primary source of income. $5 million was no small sum even for him. But when he thought of Elena, of Lucas trying to be brave despite his fear, of Mia crying because she did not understand why they had to run, he knew his choice. He agreed in a voice calm and cold, adding one condition, that Novak and his people would never approach his family again, that if anyone came within 100 meters of them, the deal would be void, and Vincent would burn everything Novak owned to the ground. And Novak raised an eyebrow, surprised by the finality, asking if Vincent loved them that much, and Vincent did not answer. He only looked at Novak with eyes like ice, the eyes of a man who had killed and would kill again if necessary, and after a moment, Novak sneered and accepted, remarking that it seemed the great Callahan had a weakness, to which Vincent replied that whether it was a weakness or a strength depended on perspective, standing and telling Novak to send the documents to his lawyers and that they would sign within 48 hours. He walked out without looking back, Marcus following in silence until they were inside the elevator, where Marcus finally spoke that Vincent had just given up 1/3 of his empire and that his father would never have done that. And Vincent answered that he was not his father, and that an empire meant nothing if there was no one to share it with, and Marcus studied him for a long moment before nodding and saying he understood and that he was still there no matter what happened. 2 days later, the pact was signed. Vincent relinquished 30% of his southern territory, the Newark shipping routes, and $5 million, and in return Novak swore never to touch Elena or the children. The underworld buzzed with whispers that Callahan had grown weak, that he had let emotions rule him, but Vincent did not care. He drove back to the villa, where Elena stood waiting at the door with Lucas and Mia at her side, telling her as he stepped out of the car that it was over and the children were safe. Elena looked at him and saw the exhaustion but also the relief in his eyes. She did not ask what he had sacrificed, and did not need to know. She only knew that he had chosen them, and that was enough. And when Mia squealed that Dad was home and ran to hug his legs asking if he had brought her candy, Vincent laughed for the first time in days, lifted his daughter into his arms, and told her he had brought something better than candy. He had brought the whole family home. 6 months later, life had changed completely. They moved into a brownstone house in Brooklyn Heights on a quiet street lined with maple trees turning gold in autumn. No more suburban villa with high walls and patrolling guards. No more crumbling South Bronx apartment with rats and mold. Just a normal, warm home where children's laughter filled the rooms every single day. Vincent restructured his empire, creating distance between dangerous operations and his family. He was still the boss, still held power in the underworld, but he built layers of protection, legitimate front companies, and most importantly, he learned balance. He no longer stayed at the office until midnight. He came home for dinner, read stories to the children before bed, and woke up every morning with Elena beside him. Lucas now called him Dad, naturally without hesitation. The boy was still quiet and observant, but the fear had left his gray eyes. His asthma was well controlled with specialized medication and clean air, and Mia remained a small whirlwind, talking endlessly, following Vincent everywhere like a shadow, proudly telling all her friends at school that her dad was the greatest man in the world. Elena continued working at Lucia's diner not because she needed the money but because she loved the work and loved the woman who had taken her in when she had nothing. Lucia cried when she heard Elena was moving, then scolded her for hiding the fact that there had been a man in her life for months. But when Vincent came to the diner for the first time wearing an expensive suit and radiating a kind of authority that silenced the room, Lucia simply looked him up and down and told him that if he ever made her girl cry, she would find him no matter who he was. And Vincent smiled and promised he never would. On a Sunday morning, sunlight poured into the small kitchen through the large window overlooking the backyard. Vincent was making pancakes, the Hello Kitty apron still his kitchen uniform. Mia sat on her father's shoulders holding a wooden spoon like a scepter, ordering him to add more chocolate chips, while Lucas stood on a chair beside the stove seriously whisking eggs with adorable concentration. Elena stood at the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame, watching the scene with a full heart. She thought of the trembling 21-year-old girl in the snow 6 years earlier, the girl who had nothing but loneliness and a fragile dream of a better life. She thought of the years of pain, the sleepless nights, the meals she skipped so her children could eat. She thought of the long road she had walked, the falls, the moments she believed she would never stand again. And as she looked at the sunlit kitchen where the man she loved was making breakfast for their children, she knew it had all been worth it. Every tear, every pain, every long night of despair had led her to this moment. Vincent looked up and caught her gaze and smiled. The same smile she had seen on that fateful night 6 years ago. The smile she thought she had lost forever, now here every day for her and their children. Elena stepped into the kitchen and joined her small family. Mia demanded to be picked up. Lucas proudly announced he had finished whisking the eggs, and Vincent leaned down to kiss her lips in a brief but loving kiss. They were not perfect. Their past was filled with scars. The future still held uncertainty and dangers from Vincent's world. But they had each other, and that was enough. Because family is not about perfection. Family is about choosing one another every day, despite everything. Family is about love strong enough to overcome darkness, patient enough to wait, and brave enough to give someone a second chance. Elena had stopped believing in miracles a long time ago, but standing in that sunlit kitchen on a Sunday morning, with her children's laughter and the arms of the man she loved around her, she realized that miracles were not distant things. Miracles were sometimes simply being found by someone you thought you had lost. Miracles were sometimes just a family. The story of Elena and Vincent reminds us that life can be harsh, but love and resilience can overcome any adversity. That it is never too late to change, to love, to choose family over power, and that sometimes the deepest connections come from the most unexpected moments. Thank you for listening until the very end. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like and share the video so we can continue bringing you meaningful stories every day. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever lived through moments that seemed hopeless only to find light again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We would truly love to hear the stories from deep within your hearts. Wishing all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. Goodbye and see you again in the next video.